Welcome back to Daniel Grant Economics, and today we are moving on from the last topic we discussed. Today we are moving on from Cardinalist approach to Ordinalist approach. And let me ask you a question.
Tell me who is ready!
We are going to look at Ordinalist approach, which is a theory that offers a different explanation with regards to the same consumer equilibrium as we discussed in Cardinalist approach. Primarily today we're going to look at the limitations of utilizing the Cardinal approach, and we're going to look at what is the Ordinalist approach. We're going to show some new concepts being the indifference curves and budget lines, and last but not least we're going to look at equilibrium in Ordinalist approach. All of that today.
Nice like a pie.
Now if you remember our earlier discussions with regards to Cardinalist approach, we mentioned we utilize utility to quantify satisfaction. Now we also mentioned in that same video that doesn't really make sense. So the first limitation, or the overall limitation we're going to discuss, is that Cardinalist approach utilizes utility. Utility assumes that we can quantify satisfaction, which we know doesn't make sense. Utility is not a universal measure of satisfaction. And then it assumes that we could use utility or a person's utility to make comparisons across individuals, when we know that is not true. The way I enjoy soca music is very different from the way other persons in this Caribbean culture and outside of the Caribbean culture enjoy soca music, because I really like that. So my utility is going to measure higher. So how are we going to compare? When I hear that latest Mecaltage and that latest mashup, my satisfaction up here, while some person might just be like, okay, another track. So therein lies the problem. Utility is not a universal measure of satisfaction, and two, it cannot be used for comparison across individuals. I must say Cardinal's approach is very useful when it comes to theoretical application, but it lacks all power when we bring it into real life. Let's move on. Welcome to Ordinalist approach. What Ordinalist approach does is literally ask you to rank what you prefer. You don't need to establish exact satisfaction levels utilizing utility. That's an oxymoron, right? Anyway, you just rank what you prefer. I like this the best, this is first. I like this a little less than the first one, this is second. I like this less than the second one, this is third. That is how you establish it. So you don't have to establish, I like this 20 utils or 40 utils to compare. You just say, hey, I prefer this the most, or this is the best combination on goods and services I want. This is my first choice. Let's use an example. Consider the Olympics utilizing Cardinalist approach, cardinal numbers. Every runner's time is noted on a piece of paper, and we only look at those numbers to determine who is best or who is fastest. So in that regard, we would know, looking at the women's 100-meter times, Julian Alfred would have gotten the gold medal in that race. Her time would be the fastest time. We know that. And whoever comes second and third, well, obviously slower.
This is one race. I'm not done. You know what I'm capable of.
Woohoo. Consider, let's see, Tebogo. He ran first in the men's 200 meters. His time would be the fastest. That's looking at those cardinal numbers. But what if we never used these numbers? What if the Olympics never timed anyone? All they did was, as you cross the line, they say you're first, you're second, you're third. That way we get the same ranking, but we're using a different method. I mean, in the same regard, we already know Julian Alfred is still going to come first, and let's see, Tebogo is still going to come first, and whoever comes second to third, well, woohoo in those races. We get to the same end, but we use a different method, and that is through ranking rather than quantifying our satisfaction using utility. That's the point. Now, in order for us to show this ranking, we must utilize diagrams, and this is the first time we're doing this here. So let's, of course, move it across the open board, alright? Now that we're on open board, we can see what I've drawn here. A single indifference curve on an axis. This is the amount of good Y, and good X. The indifference curve diagram shows combination of goods and services, or two goods or two services that the consumer is indifferent towards consuming. So if I were to ask and say, well, hey, would you like to have 5 units of good Y and 1 unit of good X? Or would you prefer 2 units of good X and 3 units of good Y? Well, if I were to ask that question with one indifference curve here,
I'm here to tell you right now, We don't care.
Let me tell you something.
We don't care. Any consumption bundle along this same indifference curve, you don't care. You are indifferent toward it. It provides the same level of satisfaction, or you rank it the same level. But if I were to include a different indifference curve, one that is further away from the origin, and let's call that I2, this changes the game a bit. Firstly, this indifference curve is a bit further off from the origin. It is operating on a different level of satisfaction. It is providing higher satisfaction. So, any point on indifference curve 2 here, which is further out, any point on indifference curve 2, any singular point is preferred over any singular point on indifference curve 1. Every point along I2 is ranked higher than any point along indifference curve 1. It's also important to note, once you have more than one indifference curve on a diagram, it is now called an indifference map. And of course, there could be an infinite amount of indifference curves going out here. What's important to note is that once it is further away from the origin, it is preferred. There is a greater level of satisfaction of the consumption bundles along that indifference curve compared to indifference curves that are closer to the origin. And of course, the origin is here, if you didn't know that. If it's closer to the origin, it is ranked lower than curves that are further away from it. That's a point. Now the other element of our analysis here. What we're going to discuss now is a budget line. Now a budget line tells us exactly how much of a good or how much goods and services we can afford. And in order to show you this again, I need to move towards open board. Let's go. And now that we're on open board, you can see what I've drawn here. It's the same axis as our indifference curve was operating on. We have good Y, we have good, let me change the color, we have good Y here, we have good X here, and we have our origin. Now, what this budget line does, it indicates to us how much of a particular good we can afford. So let me draw this a bit closer. Good. We can afford 20 units of good Y, and we can afford 5 units of good X. How did we even determine that? Well, most times you're given the level of income you're operating with. So you know, if you're given $100 and the price of good X is 20, how much units of good X can you afford? Well, simply put, you just have to take your income and divide it by 20. You're going to get 5. This is why we have 5 here. Because if I use all my money and buy units of good X alone, I'm only going to get 5. Again, if you look at our good Y, minus that, this is 20 here. If the price of good Y is $5 and I have $100, well, in order to determine how much of good Y I can afford, it's simply 100 over the $5. And I'm going to get 20, which is why we have 20 here. If I take all my income and I simply purchase good Y alone, I'm going to get 20 of these, and obviously I get 0 good Y. What this line indicates is all the affordable bundles of good X and good Y that I can purchase. All the affordable bundles. I can get bundles along this whole line that would fall within the budget. However, I cannot afford anything that lies out here. I don't have the facilities for that, as mentioned in another video. Okay? This is the point of a budget line. We have 2 points, and these 2 points assume that we're spending all our money on this particular good alone, and none on the other good. All units of good X, I get 5. All units of good Y, I get 20. And obviously 0 units of the other. Hopefully we got that clear. Now we are discussing the slope of the budget line. It's important to note the slope of the budget line is called the price ratio. And in order to show this, let's go to open board. So what we have in front of us here is our typical budget line. It tells us how much of good Y we can afford and how much of good X we can afford. And in order for us to get the price ratio, all we need to do is put the price of good X, which I haven't given as yet. Let's consider the price of good X to be good X, the price to be $4. And let's consider the price of good Y to be $10. Your income, you have $100. right? So 100 divided by 4 gives you 25, and 100 divided by 10 gives you 10. Now, in order for us to get the slope of this particular line, all you have to do to get your price ratio solely, PR, is put the price of good X over the price of good Y. And what you're going to get there, 25 over 10, and that will give you 2.5. That gives you the slope of the budget line. Now, why is this important? Well, when we move on to talk about our indifference curve, the slope of our indifference curve, you're going to see why. It's important to note that the price ratio is telling you when you give up a unit of good Y or good X, how much of the other good you can afford. So in this case, as you can see, based on our prices, if I were to give up, and what is this telling us here? If I were to give up one singular unit of good Y, I would be able to afford 2.5 units of good X. When it comes to our indifference curve, what is our indifference curve telling us? Now, the slope of our indifference curve, firstly, is called the MRS. It's called the MRS, the marginal rate of substitution. It tells you the rate at which you must give up one good in order to attain another and achieve the same level of satisfaction. So if you give up a unit of good Y, it's going to tell you how much units of good X you need in order to stay at the same level of satisfaction, the same rank of satisfaction. All right? And if we're discussing equilibrium condition here, and this is the big one, equilibrium in this case for ordinalist approach is where your marginal rate of substitution is equal to your price ratio. This simply means the slope of the indifference curve of the ICs is equal to the slope of the budget line. Why is it equilibrium? Right here is the point of equilibrium. Why is that? Consider two things. Consider we have a lower indifference curve here. Consider that IC1, IC2. Now, we're looking at points that intersect our budget line because we want to utilize all our funds, right? Any point within this budget line, if we consume any point within here, it's inefficient. We want to consume points along the budget line so that way we know we're spending all our money and getting as much goods and services as we can, right? Now, only 2 points along our initial IC curve makes sense. The rest does not. But what if there was an indifference curve as we shift this outward, where we could just graze it and we're consuming here on a higher rank of satisfaction? And as you know, if the indifference curve is further away from the origin, it is better for the consumer. They are more satisfied. They rank this consumption bundle higher. So what I'm saying is this one tangential point is way more preferred than any point along IC curve 1 because of the fact that it is on a higher ranked IC curve. And if you want to take it to the extreme point, consider a third IC curve that is out here, IC3. If you were trying to consume on IC3, well, we don't have the money for that. That is out of our range. Any point beyond the budget line, as we know, is not affordable. IC2, however, meets the criteria of putting us on the highest IC curve and utilizing our entire budget, utilizing every ounce of our income. That's why it's equilibrium. That's why it is, again, where the slope of the budget line is equal to the slope of the IC curve, which in layman's terms is where the budget line and the indifference curve barely touches one another. In econ, we call that the tangential point. That's the point. Nice. So we've looked at the limitations of our old cardinalist approach. We've looked at what ordinalist approach is, use of rankings to establish satisfaction or greater levels of satisfaction. We've looked at equilibrium condition here, utilizing a person's budget, the price of the goods. We can indeed figure out what is the optimal consumption bundle, utilizing two things we call the budget line and the indifference curve. Understanding that equilibrium here means it's the point of tangency between the budget line and an IC curve, where the MRS is equal to the price ratio. Food for thought here, or something that I think I should have highlighted. Think about if your income increases, what would happen to a budget line? Think about if the price of one good were to increase or decrease, what would happen to the budget line? You may find it's very similar to a concept we were discussing with regards to the production possibility frontier, where the line would pivot, where the line can shift according to if you change income or if you change the price of the good. This has been Dan of Grant Economics. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. Leave a comment, let me know what part stood out to you. See you next time.
In the comment section, yeah? I'm out.